Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am here to give you an update in the news. And this is an article that was published just today in the Telegraph in the UK, looking at Pfizer bringing the industry into disrepute. I'll be looking at the organization that was giving recommendations. They had orchestrated the fine. I'll be comparing it to other industries, including what happened with Credit Suisse in Switzerland and what can happen when industry gets damaged. So, this is what I'll be talking about in just a few moments. But before I start, just to remind everyone, coming up in a few days' time is me working on this advanced COVID 360, talking about viruses, variants, gain of function, the basics so that you can understand what is coming from a full 360 course. So that's just the first phase of it. So for those who want to join me, please click on the link below. Additionally, I want you to remember that we are building out a book on disease X, which we think is actually just a variant of what's going around now, but that's a different point. But you need to be prepared. What are the options you have available? Because currently, it seems now that Paxlovid has recently been declared that it has no significant benefit for the vaccinated cohort, and we're struggling with variants. It seems the population doesn't seem to have many options. Time to get outside the box. Join us in that research journey. So let's get back to the issue now, the illusion of the challenge around vaccines. Now, you have to remember, for people like myself who have been asking questions early on, it was just purely considered to be misinformation. Why are you asking? There is no need to be considering the risks. There are no risks. If there are risks, they would appear quite early. Just to remind everyone that in about 2009, when they expected the swine flu epidemic and they preempted it by vaccinating large parts of the population in Europe and the UK, they found that a number of children started to have narcolepsy where they just fall asleep. Now, interestingly, the company that developed the vaccine still doesn't accept that their vaccine caused it. But the point being, it took over a year before they started to realize. That's what we call medium term effects. Long term effects are about 4 or 5 years. So, without a shadow of a doubt, no one could know what the medium and long term effects were from this current campaign. And that's where this question came when there was a challenge with regards to what was occurring with Pfizer. So let's get back to the article. And so the article here was just showing that Pfizer brought into discredit on the pharmaceutical industry after a number of its COVID social media posts. And the link to this article is at the bottom. And they were saying that they had breached the regulatory code 5 times. Now, in order for you to see a little bit more, I think I'm going to shift over I've got a PDF of that. So it probably is a little bit easier for you to read. So, as I said, they were slapped on the wrist because they had breached the regulatory code 5 times, which was including making misleading claims about failing to maintain high standards and promoting unlicensed medicines. So, this is the watchdog here, Prescription Medicines Code of Practice Authority. They had a complaint about a message posted on X, formerly Twitter, in November 2020 by senior Pfizer employees. And so the complainant raised the concern that they were misleading and illegally promoting their COVID vaccine. It was misbehavior on social media and was even more widespread than they thought and extended right to the top of their UK operation. For anybody who was around or remembers that time, they would remember that it was all over social media. This was the pressure to make people then get vaccinated. That was the major push. Now, it was so powerful that even people who had already had COVID were pushed down that line. people with very low risk of disease. It's almost as if the whole population forgot who was high risk. And this was a lot to do with this massive push and critically, the misunderstanding by the public about relative risk reduction of 95% not being absolute risk reduction of 0.09%. If people, as I said, the population thought 95% meant if 100 people get vaccinated, 5 people will potentially get infected. If that was the case, then yes, in their mind, everybody should get it. This was the push from the politicians, this was the push from industry, this was the push from employers. But quite rightly, it wasn't accurate. And so, in terms of what they said further, they said unlicensed medicine proactively disseminated. You have to remember it was under emergency use authorization at the time. And so it was a person, a Dr. Berkeley Phillips, the medical director of Pfizer. He shared a post from an employee of Pfizer in the US, which said, our vaccine candidate was 95% effective in preventive COVID 19. For one, they didn't point out this is relative risk reduction, not absolute risk reduction, and 94% effective in people over 65 years old. And they would file all their data with health authority within days. Thankfully, somebody was on the ball and reported them immediately about what they recognized was misinformation. And this is where I find it very interesting. I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent to this because this is the relevance of it, because the whole industry would have known this. But the whole pharmaceutical industry sat quietly by watching. I could not understand that because when you look at what happens, and this is where this story came about with Credit Suisse being found guilty over money laundering charges. Now, this story is not related to the pharmaceutical industry, but it's related to Switzerland. Switzerland criminal court, they found the bank did not provide enough members of the crime syndicate from profiting of the trafficking of cocaine in Europe. Now, the problem is that this story damages the credibility of the banking sector in Switzerland. So you're guaranteed that the other banks that were trying to maintain standards would be upset because their whole industry is drawn into disrepute. It's the same issue in the around the point of the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, didn't they think that this could explode? Or maybe they just hoped that it would go away. Or maybe they didn't want to challenge another pharmaceutical company because it would not be considered appropriate. I don't know what it was, but this is going to blow up. And it's only the beginning of the blow up. So the next question I asked was the organization has a number of social media guidance rules. So this is the PMCA Social Media Guidance 2023. And in that, they give specific recommendations to companies about what can be said and what shouldn't be said in order to understand what is breaching rules. So I'll give you an example here, and the whole PDF is there if you want to search for it. So pharmaceutical companies can post or share, disseminate corporate company news, not product related, on social media. And the news that is shared and disseminated must be appropriate for the public. I suspect that this is where Pfizer fell foul. This was not appropriate for the public. It was not appropriate for Pfizer to disseminate it. And if anything, it should have come from the public health bodies who were busy disseminating it anyway. In truth, I don't think they needed to say anything too much because so many people were doing such a good job of marketing on behalf of them. So, this is where now it comes to an important question. Well, they broke the rules. They have now brought or thought to brought the industry into discredit, and I assume they are going to be punished for this. So, in terms of their punishment, what would it be? And so this is where you go back to the article, and I'm going to show you this here so that you can understand exactly what had been said. So I'm going to show you what the response here was from Pfizer, and this is from the Telegraph article. It was accidental and unintentional. It was the sixth time Pfizer has been reprimanded by a regulator over its promotion of the COVID vaccine. This has happened 5 times before. And so there was one ruling from the watchdog in 2022 found that Pfizer's chief executive made misleading statements about children's vaccines. And this was complained about as well. And they found they had misled the public. And then 3 other Pfizer cases related to LinkedIn posts. One was related to claims about a press release, and one was about posts on X. For the most recent series of breaches, Pfizer was charged administrative costs of £34,800. Wow, that is huge. I mean, that could probably break Pfizer. I mean, £34,000. Clearly, you should be able to see the sarcasm in my voice at this point, because what I then did is I went and looked to see an idea. Well, how much did Pfizer actually make of the vaccine? And I found here, this is from the European Parliamentary question, which is a good question here. Have Pfizer's huge profits worth US 30 billion from COVID vaccines been taxed in Europe? I think this may be just in Europe alone. So let's think about it a minute. If you have a situation, let me put on a business head, and if you promote it inappropriately and you could make 30 billion, and the punishment is a bit of discredit, a little bit of news, and a charge of £34,800, that's a tough decision. And so you can only imagine that in the background, the legal people of Pfizer would have looked at this and thought, you know what, it may be worth the slap on the wrist, because at the end of it, we would have made a huge profit because everybody would have gotten it. And down the line, what does it matter? Because we've made the profit anyway. That seems to be the reality, the illusion of vaccine challenge. And here is one other point that I wanted to make, because I was thinking to myself, the complaint was made in November 2020, yet the ruling is in April 2024. That's a long time. So I thought, well, what happens in other situations? So I went here and I looked at previous complaints. This was one here with regards to against Novo Nordisk, and that they made a complaint. It was received on the 7th of May 2019. It was completed by the 19th of December 2019. So this is probably about 5 to 6 months. This one here was against another company. This was received March 2016, solved by December 2016. So I can see there's a trend here, December to March. This is about 4 to 6 months on average. So the question in my mind, what was different here? Now, it may have been that they faced lots of legal challenges from Pfizer, which would be intending to drag this out for as long as possible and only accept the slap on the wrist when they had maximized the amount that they could earn from sale of the vaccine. Because as numbers have dropped off and people are no longer taking the boosters as much, well, maybe the game is up, so to speak, and therefore they would say maybe now is the time to take the slap on the wrist. I don't know if it was related to the organization, if they were delayed in what they were doing, or if it was just about legal challenge. All I'm saying is that in November 2020, when the questions should have been asked, when there was a massive push and a lot of misinformation going around the benefits and the lack of risk for which nobody had any idea, there was silence. There was silence from the industry, there was silence from Pfizer, there was silence from public health. And now that the question is asked 3 years later, does it matter? A slap on the wrist for 34,800 after making billions of dollars in profit. I think any business person would pick that rather than the ethics of making sure that what was done was actually in the interest of the population. These are the times that we are in now. It's very difficult. It's very sad to contemplate because so much is being damaged in the industry. An industry that we need, because we do need medication, we do need new research, we do need vaccines that are effective against diseases. So it's not that you want to destroy the industry, but the damage that has been done through the COVID vaccine campaign on trust in these industries could be horrendous. There's still a long way to make it back to the public. And I'm not sure if a 34,800 slap on the wrist is a good way to start. But let's be appreciative that at least there was a question. Have a great evening.